Christmas, 1895. Snow is falling on the Blue Ridge Mountains. Beyond a set of iron gates stands a residence that refuses to be called a house. It is a palace, spread across 4 acres under a single roof, 35 bedrooms, 65 fireplaces. It is a vision of limestone and glass, designed to rival the castles of kings. But that is just the facade. Behind these walls, deep in the basement, boiler rooms, the size of factories burn coal day and night. Miles of pipes hiss with steam. Hundreds of invisible hands labor in long, windowless corridors, just to keep the lights on. Biltmore was built to be a dream, but it became a machine that devoured resources. The bills piled up like the winter snow. Then came the taxes. Then the Great Depression. Then the silence of empty halls. To save this place, the family had to make a choice: keep their privacy and go bankrupt, or open the doors and let the world in. So, here is the question. Who really paid for Biltmore? Was it the Vanderbilt fortune, the labor of thousands, or was the price something else entirely? To understand how this house survived when so many others failed, we have to go back to the beginning. Chapter 1. A Palace in the Blue Ridge. Let's stand for a moment in that first winter. It is the morning of December 24th, 1895. The air tastes of wood smoke and pine. Just outside Asheville, North Carolina, a private road climbs 3 miles through the forest, winding upward until it reveals the masterpiece, Biltmore. It rises from the hillside like a fragment of the Loire Valley transplanted to America. Limestone walls, steep slate roofs, and turrets catching the pale winter light. The scale is difficult to comprehend. The banquet hall alone has a ceiling that soars 70 feet high. The library holds 10,000 volumes. Beneath the stone and oak lies a marvel of modern engineering. In 1895, most of rural America is still living by candlelight. Biltmore has electric lights in every room. It has elevators. It has central heating, fueled by massive boilers. It has a fire alarm system and refrigeration. Numbers signal the magnitude, but they do not deliver the sensation. Stand in the entrance hall and look up. The stone climbs for 3 stories. A barrel-vaulted ceiling carries carved oak details. Underfoot, polished marble. The architecture is staged to overwhelm, to announce that you have stepped into something deliberately extraordinary. But step past the showpiece rooms, past the winter garden with its fountain, past the tapestries, and the other face of the house appears. Deep in the foundation, the house is industrial. Store rooms hold linens, china, crystal, and silver in military order. The kitchens are laid out not for a family, but for an operation. There are servant staircases, narrow and unadorned, hidden from guests. Long service corridors, painted institutional green and lit by bare bulbs, weave a second circulatory system through the building. Staff move along these arteries unseen. Fires are lit before dawn. Water runs hot before anyone wakes. Breakfast appears the moment it is wanted. In 1895, Biltmore employs well over 100 people: maids, footmen, cooks, laundresses, stable hands, gardeners, electrical engineers to tend the generators, plumbers for the intricate piping. Each post has a purpose. Remove one, and the mechanism falters. The beauty is real, but the cost is real, too. Together, they will govern every choice that follows. Chapter 2. George Vanderbilt's different dream. Who builds a house like this? The answer is not the man you might expect. George Washington Vanderbilt II was born in 1862 into America's wealthiest family. His grandfather, the Commodore, built a transportation empire of steamships and railroads. By the time George received his share of the inheritance, the Vanderbilt name signified power, influence, and money on a scale few human beings had ever known. But George was different from his brothers. While his older siblings raised palaces in Newport and New York, hosting glittering parties and chasing society's approval. George disappeared into books. He was shy, soft-spoken, and uneasy in crowds. He reportedly spoke 8 languages. His passions ran to art, literature, horticulture, and forestry. He collected rare volumes with the intensity others reserved for racehorses. He traveled to Europe, not just to socialize, but to study how great estates functioned as complete systems. By his mid-20s, he had decided on something his brothers did not understand. He did not want a showpiece for entertaining. He wanted a working estate, a place to read, think, and manage forests scientifically. He wanted a retreat. In 1888, George visited Asheville with his mother. The town lay in a valley ringed by the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air was cool and clean. The scenery was dramatic. George was captivated. He began buying land, not a token plot for a summer cottage, but thousands of acres. He bought farms, wooded hillsides, and eroded fields that had been exhausted by careless farming. In time, his holdings exceeded 125,000 acres. That is nearly 200 square miles, an area larger than many European principalities. His plan took shape. George wanted a house that married European tradition to American technology. He wanted farms to produce food. He wanted forests managed on scientific principles. He believed that the family fortune, carefully invested, could fund both the construction and the ongoing operations forever. In 1888, it seemed reasonable. The initial budget for the house was reported at roughly $5 million, well over $100 million in today's terms, and that was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Building a mountain machine. To bring this idea into the world, George needed expertise he did not possess. He turned to 2 giants of the 19th century. The first was Richard Morris Hunt, America's leading architect. Hunt understood scale. He knew how to make a building feel at once historic and current. The second was Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect behind Central Park. Olmsted was 70 years old, and his philosophy was firm. Landscape is not decoration. It is a living system. Building Biltmore was not a matter of hiring a few contractors. It was a military operation. The site was remote. There were no workshops for intricate metalwork or carved stone. Even transportation was inadequate. So, George built the infrastructure first. A private spur of the Southern Railway was driven straight to the site to deliver materials. A brick kiln was built on the property to fire millions of bricks. A woodworking mill turned timber into flooring. At the project's peak, more than 1,000 men worked on the hill. It was a temporary city. Stonemasons from Italy brought old-world cutting techniques. Local carpenters from Asheville shaped the white oak interiors. For many locals, it was the best-paying job the region had ever seen. But the logistics were staggering. Limestone blocks weighing hundreds of pounds traveled from Indiana by rail. Oak beams, some more than 40 feet long, had to be hauled up mountain roads. Copper sheets for the roof arrived in bundles. Every nail, every pane of glass, every light fixture was ordered, shipped, inventoried, and installed to Hunt's exact specifications. Olmsted, meanwhile, faced a landscape that was broken. Decades of logging had stripped the soil. The hills were scarred by erosion. He didn't just plant a garden. He set out to heal the earth. He ordered the planting of hundreds of thousands of trees. He designed an approach road 3 miles long that wound through the recovering forest, revealing the views in a carefully calculated sequence. Construction began in 1890. It took 5 years of punishing labor. Stone dust burned the men's lungs. Winters bit hard, but by Christmas of 1895, the shell was tight, the systems were running, and the miracle was complete. Chapter 4. A house that eats money. When the guests arrived that first Christmas, they were dazzled, but George knew something they did not. A structure of this size is a living creature, and it is always hungry. The house demanded constant attention. More than 100 staff members were required just to maintain the baseline. Maids changed linens and guarded the finish of every surface. Footmen stoked the 65 fireplaces. Laundresses wrestled mountains of clothing. But the real cost was in the systems. Coal arrived by the carload to feed the boilers. Provisions were purchased in bulk. Maintenance never stopped. A slate roof leaks. A hairline crack appears in the plaster. A pipe gives way in a cold snap. Every fix required skilled hands and expensive materials. George kept careful books. Ledgers in the archives itemize everything: salaries, coal, food, repairs, insurance. The figures are daunting. George had a plan to offset this. The estate was designed to be productive. The dairy turned out milk, butter, and cheese, which were sold in Asheville. The gardens supplied vegetables year-round. The estate raised hogs and chickens. The goal was practical self-sufficiency. For a time, it worked. The farm revenue helped, but it could never equal the cost of operating the house itself. The deficit was covered by George's investment income from the Vanderbilt empire. Daily operations ran on choreography. Staff worked in shifts so that the house never slept. A household manager coordinated the machine. Supplies rolled in by rail. The blacksmith shop repaired tools. The carpenter shop built furniture. The house was magnificent, yes, but it was also a financial tightrope walk. George managed with care, chasing efficiencies, refusing waste. He hoped that over time, the estate's productivity would grow enough to carry the weight of the mansion. Chapter 5. Forests and the Birth of American Forestry. While the house consumed resources, the land was beginning to give something back. This is the part of the Biltmore story that often gets overshadowed by the gold and the limestone. When George bought the land, the forest was dying. Lumber companies had taken the best trees. Farmers had cleared steep slopes, ruining the soil. George wanted to prove that science could fix this. He hired Gifford Pinchot, a young American forester trained in Europe. Pinchot surveyed the 125,000 acres and saw a laboratory. He introduced selective cutting. Instead of wiping out entire hillsides, crews harvested only mature trees, leaving younger growth to protect the soil. This was radical. In the 1,890 seconds, most Americans viewed forests as inexhaustible mines to be stripped and abandoned. Pinchot viewed them as crops to be managed. When Pinchot left to found the U.S. Forest Service, George hired Carl Schenk, a German forester. In 1898, Schenk founded the Biltmore Forest School, the first forestry school in America. Students lived on the estate. They learned by doing, measuring timber, laying out roads, fighting fires, and studying soil. This was George's most consequential investment. The house was for him. The forest was for the future. The Biltmore Woods became a model for the entire nation. It proved that you could harvest timber without destroying the land. But even this success could not stop the financial storm that was gathering on the horizon. Chapter 6. Tax, Death, and a Widow with a Ledger. By 1910, Biltmore had reached a fragile equilibrium. George and his wife Edith, whom he married in 1898, lived a quiet life. They had a daughter, Cornelia. The estate was stable. Then, the rules of the game changed. In 1913, the United States ratified the 16th Amendment, creating a federal income tax. Until then, the Vanderbilt fortune had grown largely tax-free. Now, a significant share of George's annual income, the money that paid for the coal and the staff, went to Washington. The math shifted overnight. Operating costs remained high, but the money available to meet them shrank. Then came the tragedy. In March of 1914, George traveled to Washington, D.C., for surgery. He suffered complications from appendicitis. He died on March 6th. He was only 51 years old. The shock was absolute. Edith was left alone. She was 43, a widow with a teenage daughter, and an estate that employed hundreds of people. She sat at George's desk in the library and opened the books. The picture was terrifying. Annual operating costs hovered around $250,000, roughly $7 million today. The farm and timber revenue covered perhaps 1/3 of that. The rest had come from George. Without him, and with the new estate taxes and income taxes biting deep, the arithmetic was unforgiving. If she tried to run Biltmore exactly as George had, she would be bankrupt within a decade. Edith was not just a socialite, she was a pragmatist. She understood what many in her position did not. Sentiment does not pay the bills. She had to act. Chapter 7. Selling mountains to save a house. Edith made a decision that would change the map of North Carolina. She looked at the 125,000 acres. It was too much. The cost of administering that much land was draining the accounts. So, she opened talks with the federal government. The U.S. Forest Service was looking to create national forests in the East. The land George had assembled and healed was perfect. In 1916, the sale closed. Edith sold approximately 86,700 acres, nearly 2/3 of the estate, to the federal government. This land became the nucleus of the Pisgah National Forest. The sale achieved two things. It generated the capital Edith needed to retire debts and stabilize the finances. And, just as importantly, it ensured that George's forestry experiment would continue under federal protection. She retained roughly 8,000 acres around the house and the village. It was a massive reduction, but it saved the core. Next, she turned to the house. Staff headcount shrank from over 100 to roughly 60. Unused wings of the house were closed off. Vents were shut to save coal. Formal gardens were simplified. Edith stopped traveling. She stopped entertaining. She focused entirely on survival. For the next 15 years, she ran Biltmore with a lean discipline. She kept the roof fixed and the bills paid. She held the line. Chapter 8. Depression and opening the gates. Then came 1929. The stock market crashes. The Great Depression swallowed the global economy. Even well-diversified families watched their assets evaporate. The investments Edith relied on to cover the deficit stopped paying dividends. At the same time, Asheville was devastated. Banks failed. Tourism vanished. Unemployment in the mountains soared past 20%. Edith faced a grim ledger. Income was down. Expenses were fixed. Some advisors suggested selling the land for development, breaking the estate into subdivisions. But in a depression, who would buy? And if the land went, the house would be a white elephant. Too big to live in, too expensive to tear down. Then, a radical idea was proposed. Open Biltmore to the public. Charge admission. For a woman of Edith's class, this was almost scandalous. Privacy was a religion. To let strangers walk through your library, to let them stare at your dining table, it was unthinkable. But Edith looked at the numbers, and she looked at Asheville. If Biltmore drew tourists, those travelers would spend money in local hotels and restaurants. The estate would need guides and guards, creating jobs for locals who were desperate for work. She swallowed her pride. In March of 1930, Biltmore opened its doors. The admission was set at $2. It was a gamble. Would anyone pay that kind of money when bread was scarce? They did. People came from all over. They came to see the fantasy. They came to escape the bleak reality of the 1,930 seconds for a few hours. They walked through the banquet hall and looked up at the ceiling. They marveled at the art. The revenue was modest, but it was a lifeline. More importantly, the model had shifted. Biltmore was no longer just a home. It was a museum. It was a business. Chapter 9. War, masterpieces, and a new purpose. The Depression dragged on, but Biltmore survived. Then, in 1941, the world broke again. Pearl Harbor. Tourism halted overnight. Gas was rationed. No one was driving to North Carolina to look at a mansion. Edith faced another financial cliff, but this time, the house found a new way to serve. The National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., was in a panic. They feared a bombing attack on the Capitol. They needed a place to hide America's greatest artistic treasures. Works by Rembrandt, Raphael, and Vermeer. They needed a place that was fireproof, climate-controlled, and far from the coast. Biltmore was perfect. In 1942, trucks arrived in the middle of the night. They carried crates stenciled only with numbers. Armed guards patrolled the grounds. The unfinished music room and several windowless bedrooms were turned into high-security vaults. Inside those crates was the cultural soul of Western civilization, including the iconic Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, the one on the $1 bill. For the duration of the war, Biltmore was not a palace. It was a fortress. The government paid rent, which helped Edith keep the lights on. But more than money, it gave Biltmore a moral purpose. It proved that this Gilded Age relic had value to the nation. When the war ended and the art returned to Washington, the lesson remained. Biltmore could adapt. Biltmore could serve. Chapter 10. Who really paid for Biltmore? Chapter 10. Edith guided the estate through the 1,950 seconds. But the long-term survival of Biltmore eventually fell to her grandsons, the Cecils. They understood what George could not have foreseen, that to save the house, they had to run it like a corporation. In the decades that followed, they professionalized everything. They planted vineyards and opened a winery. They built hotels. They turned preservation into a science. Today, Biltmore draws more than 1 million visitors a year. It employs over 2,000 people, far more than George ever did. It is a massive economic engine for the region. So, let's go back to the question we started with. Who really paid for Biltmore? George Vanderbilt paid for the stone and the vision, but his money wasn't enough to keep it alive. The workers paid for it with their sweat and their craft. Edith paid for it with her sacrifice, selling off the mountains she loved to save the home she built. And the visitors, millions of them over the last century, paid for it, one ticket at a time. Biltmore exists today not because it is beautiful, but because it was willing to change. It survived because it stopped being a fortress for one family and became a legacy for everyone. The price of a dream like this is high. It costs money, yes, but it also costs the humility to realize that if you want your legacy to last, you have to share it. If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories and these places alive. Tell me in the comments, which historic estate should we investigate next? The Breakers, Hearst Castle, or perhaps a lost mansion that didn't survive? Thank you so much for watching until the end. What did you think of this video? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Empire Legacies truly appreciates your support. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you again in the next episode.